The Khabib vs Tony curse has struck for a fifth time, only this time it's not manifested in a dodgy weight cut or a badly placed electrical cord, but a global pandemic. And with Khabib appearing to have decided to stay in Dagestan and quarantine with his family, rather than try to fly to the US amid mass travel bans with no guarantee of being able to get back into Russia, it looks like the dream fight won't be taking place on April 18th after all. But Dana White is still hell-bent on pushing forward with 249 with or without Nurmagomedov, despite COVID-19 bringing major sporting institutions such as the Olympics, the NBA and the Premier League to a standstill. The UFC, still looking to put on an event in just a couple of weeks during the most severe public health crisis of our time, is undoubtedly a reckless move and it shouldn't be going ahead, if it even can. But MMA fans are absolutely starved for fights right about now, so let's admit it, most of us would watch it. So if it's going to go ahead either way, what would UFC 249's card realistically look like? First off, there's the small matter of where the event could even take place right now during the coronavirus pandemic. Last week, sportsbetting.ag actually released odds for UFC 249's location, with Florida coming in as favourite, followed by the likes of the UAE, Mexico and Saudi Arabia. However, with travel restrictions being heightened since then, and with most available fighters being based in the States, it could only really happen in the US. Maybe in Florida, where a behind closed doors event took place only a couple weeks ago, or a Native American reservation somewhere, or potentially even on an oil tanker in international waters. Regardless, the UFC is truly going completely rogue by trying to put this on, so they may as well throw the rulebook out the window. Now for the main event. Earlier in the week, when it became apparent that the UFC's botched attempt to move 249 to the Middle East led to Khabib being stranded in Russia, Ariel Helwani reported that Justin Gaethje had been offered the Ferguson fight. There's been very little movement when it comes to that bout, but Ferguson has expressed some skepticism about Gaethje as an opponent without ruling the fight out entirely. And though it would be far from the long-awaited grudge match we've been teased with for 5 years, it certainly wouldn't be a terrible alternative. Ferguson and Gaethje are two elite blood and guts warriors who have never been in a bad fight in their lives, but I didn't even need to tell you that. When it comes to violent matchmaking, you'd be hard pressed to book a fight bloodier than this. What's more, with Justin being ranked 4th and having knocked out his last 3 opponents in the first round, not to mention the champion being unable to compete due to situations beyond his control, there's a strong case for adding an interim title to the bout. That being said, the ball's pretty much in Ferguson's court, and there's a fair chance that he could understandably choose to sit and wait for Khabib until this whole corona thing dies down. After all, as much as the scalp of a monster like Gaethje would look good in Tony's record, his legacy will never truly be complete without getting the chance to test himself against his longtime rival, so it may not be a risk worth taking. If that does turn out to be the case, the UFC will probably pull the plug on the whole event, and the rest of this video becomes rather pointless. But anyway, what about the rest of the cards? Dana White was pretty insistent that UFC 249 would go ahead with a full bill, so how many of these bouts are actually plausible? With the event looking like it will have to go down stateside, many athletes are going to struggle to get over to the US at the moment due to flight bans, which means that a lot of fighters are going to be left without dance partners. Luckily, however, a fair few still look to be possible for April 18th, including the rematch in the co-main between Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas, which with Andrade recently announcing that she's travelling from Brazil to Las Vegas at the UFC's request, may have been saved. If she doesn't manage to make it for whatever reason, fellow former strawweight champion Carla Esparza was booked to face Michelle Waterson on the cancelled Portland card just a week later, so she'd probably be ready to step in and give Namajunas a chance to avenge her 2014 loss in the final of TUF 20. Unlike Andrade, others appear to have missed the boat and are now unable to make the trip because their native country has closed their borders, such as Dagestan-based Magomed Ankalaev, who like Khabib would find it difficult to travel from Russia, leaving the rematch of his controversial bout with Ion Cutelaba on the rocks. However, Moldova's Cutelaba has actually been in Vegas for a couple of weeks now, so can we find him an opponent? Well, there are plenty of fighters like Esparza who are either in or fresh out of camp and in need of a payday, who are booked to compete on the cancelled fight nights in Ohio and Oregon, along with the scheduled shows in Nebraska, Oklahoma and Sao Paulo in the weeks after UFC 249. I'm not including the London card in this, because those fighters appear to have been paid their show money, which could soon be the case with the other scrap shows, but for the purposes of this, we push on. Out of the light heavyweights on those cards who are likely to be available, the most suitable option for Cutelaba is probably former interim title challenger Ovin St. Preux, who is set to take on yet another Dagestani in Shamil Gamzatov on the Oklahoma City card a week later. The 7-year Octagon veteran has a ton of experience, and although he may be 2-3 in his last 5, he is coming in off another Von Preuss submission win and would surely serve as a stiff test for the 26-year-old Cutelaba. Using the same matchmaking formula, I sought a new adversary for Alexander Hernandez, who is meant to fight Islam Makhachev, who, seeing as he and Khabib are basically joined at the hip, is almost certainly staying in Russia with him. This one was a bit harder, but the best opponent for the lightweight prospect that I could come up with is Drew Dober, who has a bout with Carlos Diego Ferreira targeted for UFC Oklahoma City on May 2nd, but that show probably won't happen anyway. The Elevation Fight Team product is 5-1 in his last 6 with back-to-back first-round finishes of Marco Pollo Reyes and the highly touted Nasrat Haqparast in his last 2. So even though a win may not do as much for Hernandez in the rankings, it would still make for great viewing. As we go further down the card, there are several more bouts between US-based fighters that look like they're good to go, but yet, some bouts are still in jeopardy. At 155 pounds, Karma Worthy was looking to build on his short-notice first-round KO back at UFC 241 against fellow knockout artist Otman Azaitar. Now Azaitar may be based in Germany, but he did spend part of his camp over at AKA, so he could very well have stayed in the US and therefore could still be able to compete. If not, there are a few lightweights who are booked to fight a week later in Lincoln that you could put Worthy up against, but as a UFC newcomer, Sean Shelby may want to look elsewhere in the pool of talent at 155 that he has at his disposal. On the Fight Pass prelims, Floyd Mayweather-backed middleweight Mahmoud Muradov was set to take on Carl Roberson, but with him being in the Czech Republic right now, he may not be able to make it to the party. If not, there's a few 185ers whose bouts were cancelled that he could fight, most of which Roberson would match up well with, such as Eric Anders. And finally we have undefeated bantamweight Hunter Azure, who was supposed to make his sophomore walk to the octagon opposite Khabib's cousin Umar Nurmagomedov, who's obviously unavailable. Out of all the 135ers fresh out of camp, Florida's Randy Costa, who was initially paired with Martin Day for UFC Columbus on March 28th, would probably make the best fitting opponent for Azure. So with that bit of rough matchmaking, UFC 249 could feasibly feature a full 12 fight card, providing they can secure a location. The promotion could also decide to salvage some great fights from the shows they've had to postpone and add them to the cards, such as the show-stopping heavyweight clash between Francis Ngannou and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. They could even decide to make completely new fights from scratch, seeing as this could be their last event for a long time and they've already gone completely off the rails. Either way, 249 could end up looking nothing like the makeshift card we've scrambled together, or there's a strong chance that it doesn't happen at all. But let us know what you think about the fights we've made in the comments, and until next time, stay safe, stay at home, and for all things combat, stay locked into Fight HQ, powered by Videoblog.